Louis L'Amour is called America's best-selling frontier storyteller. There's no doubt that he is one of America's most prolific writers. 84 novels about the West, hundreds of short stories, all in a writing career that has spanned 30 years. You would think after all that, Louis L'Amour has exhausted all the stories he could possibly write about the Old West. But he smiles and shakes his head no.
There's just so much material. There's an enormous background of material in this country, and it hasn't even been scratched. I've touched on things that nobody else has written about, and in some respects, and I've approached them, of course, all in a different respect, but there's much that's never been tapped at all.
L'Amour considers himself a historian of sorts. Any descriptions of daily life, any locations, any events in his novels have all been researched and accurately portrayed as they existed during the frontier days. L'Amour believes that being true to what he's writing about is important.
It's not right to pervert history. If you want to do a story and make it up out of whole cloth, fine, that's your privilege. But nobody has the right to alter history.
To gain this historical accuracy, L'Amour often travels to the places he writes about.
Because many times you can't understand something unless you see the location. Just like the police, when they're studying a crime, they go out and make measurements and study the scene of the crime very carefully. And it's the only way you can understand some things.
Of his 84 novels, 16 focus on the Sackett family, tracing their adventures through succeeding generations.
The Sacketts are a family that lived in Tennessee and came west from there. And in some of the books, I go back to England in the 1600s and tell how they came over here originally, came over to America, and settled in the Carolinas, then moved to Tennessee. And I take them through generation after generation. See, what happened here is exactly what I'm telling. My own family is an example. My mother's family, they settled in New Hampshire, then went on to Pennsylvania, then to Minnesota and Dakota, and I'm in California. And family after family did that in this country. And what I'm trying to show is what happened here and how it happened.
The historical accuracy in L'Amour's novels and his ability to tell an interesting story have resulted in several movies based on his works. The most notable film is from his book Hondo and starred John Wayne. And recently a television movie was filmed based on L'Amour's book The Shadow Riders, starring Tom Selleck.
It's marvelous, though, to see your characters come alive. You sit there at a typewriter and you create a character on paper, and then suddenly you see him up there on the screen. You see Tom Selleck up there playing Orrin Sackett, for example, or playing Mac Traven. And it's a marvelous feeling to see these people come alive, see your characters actually flesh and blood, moving and writing and doing things.
L'Amour has not always written stories about the West. When he first started out, he wrote sports and mystery stories, Far East and sea stories, even a novel about 12th century Europe. In fact, the first piece of writing L'Amour ever sold was to a pulp magazine.
First short story I sold, I got $6.50 for it.
What'd you sell that to?
A magazine called True Gang Life. And it was a short.
From there, L'Amour refined his skills as a writer and started on a series of Western novels that would form the basis of his writing career. And in terms of careers, L'Amour has held a variety of jobs in his life: a longshoreman, a lumberjack, a boxer, a miner, and many others. Such a variety of jobs and skills are reflected in the variety of books L'Amour has in his personal library collection.
You should see my library. I have about 9,000 books, carefully selected in my own personal library. And every time a scholar comes into the place, he's amazed because they find books that they've never seen before. Books about India, about China, about Arabia, about England, all kinds of very esoteric things, you know. And how forests were managed in England in the Middle Ages, for example, things like that.
And in any Louis L'Amour book you read, you'll find one thing missing: profanity. L'Amour has strong feelings on that subject, especially when it comes to writing.
I've written all these stories without any pornography, without any obscenity. I grew up among sailors and miners and lumberjacks and the roughest kind of men in the world, but I never found it necessary to use all that in the stories. I could make them real without that. I think much of that kind of writing is a cover-up for lack of real skill.
And his advice to would-be writers?
Read the best writing you can find and write. Write all the time, anything you can write, anytime. When I first started out, I couldn't sell short stories. I didn't know enough about it. I had to teach myself how to write a short story.
84 novels, hundreds of short stories, 30 years of writing. If you were to even suggest to Louis L'Amour that perhaps he's written about as much as he can, he'd smile at you and quickly dispel any such notion.
I'll be writing as long as I can handle a typewriter and as long as I can get around. And I've got many, many stories to write.